All right, let's dive into a topic that is so often hidden in plain sight, narcissism. But we're going to look at it through a specific lens, focusing on how its traits can show up very, very differently in females. It's a really complex and frankly misunderstood area, so let's unpack it together. Okay, before we get into the thick of it, it is absolutely crucial to say this loud and clear. This explainer is for insight, for education. We are exploring patterns of behavior, not handing out diagnoses. Only a licensed mental health professional can do that. Right, with that very important point made, let's get started. So, let me ask you a question. When you hear that word narcissist, who pops into your head? I'm willing to bet that for most of us, it's a man. And that common stereotype, well, that's exactly why we so often miss how these same traits can manifest in a completely different way in women. Now look, the core ingredients are the same. That exaggerated sense of self-importance, that feeling of entitlement, and a real lack of empathy. Those are universal. But the way they're expressed, that's not universal at all. It's this unique presentation in females that we're zooming in on today, because it's these subtle differences that so often fly right under the radar. To really, truly understand this, we have to start from the inside and work our way out. Because you see, every single external behavior we're about to talk about, it's all just an elaborate defense mechanism. It's armor built to protect a deeply fragile inner world. And this slide right here, this gets to the heart of the why. Because at the absolute core of narcissism isn't this massive ego people think it is. It's actually the opposite. It's fueled by these incredibly powerful negative feelings: self-doubt, fear, inferiority, and a deep, deep sense of shame. This is the engine that drives that desperate, never-ending need for validation from the outside world. You know, the source material offers a perfect analogy from, of all places, Dr. Seuss. Think about Yertle the turtle. He built this false confidence by literally standing on top of others, pushing them down just to feel taller himself. But just like Yertle's throne of turtles, this constant, endless climb for superiority is built on a super shaky and ultimately self-destructive foundation. So, okay, how does that fragile inner world actually translate into outward behavior? Well, it shows up as a set of tools, or as our source material calls them, weapons, that are used to get that external validation and control the environment, all to make that fragile core feel safe. We're going to break this down into 4 key mechanisms that are often used to feed that narcissistic core: appearance, seduction, money, and relationships. First up, appearance. Look, in a world that often puts huge value on how women look, this becomes a primary tool for getting validation. We're not just talking about looking good. It becomes an obsession with marketing oneself as the most charming, most beautiful, most captivating person in the room. And if someone else gets more attention, that can trigger what's called a narcissistic wound. It pokes that deep internal feeling of inferiority. The response? She might get aggressive, or even worse, shame the other person to snatch that spotlight right back. Seduction is another huge tool, but it's used very strategically. This is really different from something like histrionic personality disorder, which is more about a generalized, constant need for attention. For the narcissist, seduction is like a laser-guided missile. They identify a high-value object, someone with status, money, or connections, and they use their charm to gain control and get access to that person's world. And this focus on external image, of course, extends to money. Money isn't just money, it's points in a status game. This often leads to completely reckless spending on flashy, high-end items, all to project an image of success, all to create an external picture that soothes that internal feeling of being small and insignificant. But here's the reality check, right? That high-status image is almost always just that, an image. The source material is really clear on this. Most people with these traits achieve very little in their own right and are often buried in debt. Why? Because in their mind, someone as special as them shouldn't have to bother with things like budgets or limits. Now, in relationships, this can become incredibly destructive. The source material uses this really powerful Black Widow analogy. A partner is put on a pedestal, idealized to draw them in, only to be controlled and devalued later. That partner is then made responsible for the narcissist's happiness, which is, an impossible job. And when they inevitably fail, or when someone who seems like a higher status object comes along, they are punished or just abandoned. And maybe the most impactful area where all these traits come together is in parenting. This is where that constant, desperate need for validation can create a really damaging echo that affects generations to come.
See, the child isn't seen as their own separate person. They're viewed as a direct extension of the parent. So a child's success isn't really their own, it's just proof of the parent's superiority. And a child's failure? Oh, that's not just a mistake. It's a deep, personal source of shame for the parent, a burden that the child is then forced to carry.
This dynamic often creates a really toxic divide and conquer situation in the family. One child is usually chosen as the favorite, the golden child, and their own budding narcissism is actually nurtured and encouraged. The other children, on the other hand, are often neglected, left to feel completely unworthy and insecure. It's a dynamic that can set them up for their own lifelong struggles. For a child growing up in this environment, love is totally conditional. It's used as a tool of manipulation. Affection is given, and then it's suddenly yanked away. The sources describe this experience so perfectly. It's like you're in a marathon with no finish line, endlessly chasing this idea of a good mother like a carrot on a stick that you never, ever get to eat. So, this brings us to the final big picture theme that really pulls all of this together. This relentless, all consuming need to be on top, to prove their supremacy in every single interaction. To them, life is one constant competition. It doesn't matter if it's at work, at home, or even in social settings like the local PTA, they have to be the queen bee. They will battle other women for dominance because they need to win. And here is a huge tell. The more demonstrably wrong they are about something, the greater the outrage and the drama they display. Why? Because admitting a simple mistake feels like an unbearable narcissistic wound. And this really brings us to the core distinction we need to make. Healthy self-worth, it comes from inside. It allows you to be genuinely happy for the success of others. But the narcissistic state we've been exploring is totally different. It's a fragile state that requires the failure of other people just to feel whole. And that right there is the difference that is so worth understanding.